It's not funny, but it is funny because I remember growing up that Santa Claus
Mm-hmm.
was a form of guilt on
Mm,
kids.
mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, if you're
Meaning,
meaning if you're not good, you won't get a present.
right, right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's used today
Mm-hmm.
still. Are
Yeah.
you on the naughty list?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a form of guilt. Like,
That's a form of
yeah,
guilt, and that's a mild case. But if that kind of guilt is practiced cumulatively, that can be very detrimental.
can you go deeper into that?
Meaning, if it's just by itself, if you're like you doing it one time, it's not really a big deal. It's like, oh, if you don't behave, then you're not going to get your present from
Yeah.
Santa Claus. Like, but if that kind of behavior is repeated throughout your ways of being, that can be really detrimental for yourself and for the people around you.
It feels really, now that I'm older and looking at it, it feels really controlling.
It is controlling.
Yeah.
It is controlling. And, this is what we also get to understand that, again, based on the framework, controlling is ego plus stress. So you're operating from an inflamed ego. At that point, when you're operating from an inflamed ego, your one of your primary directives, your ego is fighting for, is for its safety. And
Mm-hmm.
control is a way of being made to feel safe. Does that make
So,
sense?
yeah, it another thing that I'm thinking about regarding guilt, like you could look at it and pretty much find out where it came from. And just me observing it, it really came from, just my opinion, the Catholic Church.
There's definitely lines you can draw that guilt is it could heavily be pointed at the direction of the Catholic Church in regards to the Philippines, for sure. And that's generations deep. So,
Mm-hmm.
trying to break that generational pattern, it can be very challenging. But again, I would ask the question, what's more challenging? Continuing to be down that path and possibly severing relationships, or it becomes at the expense of yourself, maybe your health, or just again in your dynamics with family members. Is that where you want to go,
Yeah.
or do you want to do you want to move towards happiness? Do you want to have a life of ease, flow, and grace?
Yeah. I just remember being forced to go to church on
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, and then the
Mm-hmm.
guilt, like, oh, this is going to happen to you if you don't go to church on Sunday. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It didn't
And
feel good. It wasn't part of my being. I didn't feel good being guilted like that. I've seen family members who wanted to break away from the Catholic Church go through hell,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
trying to get away from that and, finding another religion that they want to follow or be
Mm-hmm.
involved with
Mm-hmm.
and being involved in that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So, and that destroys families for sure.
It can, and it could also, if you're allowed to break away from those generational patterns and work in yourself, when you revisit those relationships again, you're operating from the highest versions of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're operating from the highest versions of who you are, and you go back to those relationships, who knows, maybe those relationships end up being mended and flourishing, right?
Yeah.
Breaking generational patterns doesn't mean it's bad. There's a lot of good in breaking generational patterns. There may be fallout, there may be consequences, but a lot of these people that fall off of your radar, maybe you don't want to be around that toxic behavior. I mean, you get to question, are the people that I'm hanging out with, are they in alignment with my mission statement or North Star?
Yeah. Got it.
Or am I going to continue being in a relationship with these people where it's costing me my well-being? I get to ask that question,
Yeah.
right? Am I going to continue with the gossip and circulate that energy, or do I stand in my power and choose me and live a life that is in alignment with my mission statement and North Star?
I like that better. Because
Right.
that, when you feel that negativity and you don't know what that is and you're trying to find it, it could fester
It could
and become
fester.
something else
Yeah. And who
that's
knows how to,
unhealthy. Yeah,
exactly.
definitely.
Exactly.
It just reminded me of what you were talking about. Another generational pattern that you saw for yourself was you led by fear. Can you go into that a little bit more?
There was a time when I was leading projects or directing or leading a team, and my model of leading was through fear, whether it was through coaches. Like I definitely experienced that through different team sports like football, soccer.
Mhm.
Operating from fear is very common, and I started to recognize that in my ways of being. And then when I looked at that behavior and I looked at my lineage, I could see how, my dad was in corporate America, so he was as he was climbing up the corporate ladder, and being a person of color, leading
Yeah,
a
yeah,
predominantly white company, he had to position himself from a place of authority and fear, so he would operate from that perspective. My grandfather, who was a leader during during World War II, he definitely led by fear. If you fucked up, it was going to cost you severely,
yeah. Your life,
because it could
basically.
it could
Yeah,
cost you your life, because when you fuck up in wartime, that's not a good thing.
yeah,
So he led by fear, and that was my model of leadership at that time, and and it was effective. Was it healthy? Not so
mm,
much. Not so much. When I was leading by fear, I got things done, and some of these things that I got done turned out pretty good.
yeah,
But how I felt about it, how the people around me felt about it, that there was a big question mark there. And I got to explore different ways, in different behavior patterns that I could use that were more in alignment with my mission statement and North Star, to be able to lead more effectively and efficiently with a lot more ease, flow, and grace. And when I made that transition, I was much happier. The people around me were much happier. The production values were through the roof. An example for me in my life of how breaking generational patterns was really, really effective. Did I lose relationships? There were some relationships I did lose. But if I were to be really honest, those relationships were not healthy relationships anyway.
mm. That was actually going to be my last question.
Mm.
Like, dealing with all of this generational patterns, you are going to lose possibly even your parents, because you break away from these generational patterns. Like, for example, I was talking about breaking away from the church.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Filipinos are like Catholicism all the way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Some, not all.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the parents just I've seen go ballistic.
Mm-hmm.
That what are you doing? You're leaving. So the last question I had with you, and you just brought it up, like, how does one deal with losing those friendships, family members? And maybe, like you said before, that we grow older, we could come back to those relationships, and then we're much better for each other as
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, how does one deal with all of the carnage that comes with breaking generational patterns?
Well, again, to your point, when you take that break, and none of these relationships, they can be permanent or they can be temporary,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like these breakups with family members or with friends. And when you take that break, you do have an opportunity to work on yourself and revisit those relationships. There's always that. And it's a tough one. I get it. You know what I mean? Like it can be sad losing someone who's been in your life, like a best friend for years, sometimes decades. And if life happens, events happen, and people's behaviors change, and if they don't align, then you really get to ask yourself: is this because the relationships can have an expiration date,
Yeah.
right? You know, they serve their purpose and people evolve, and then sometimes you fall out of touch. And the question you get to ask is, the relationship that I'm currently in, are these behaviors in my alignment? Because a lot of times the people that are coming to me, they're on that path of trying to figure shit out for themselves so that they
Yeah.
can have that ease, flow, and grace. And if they're attached to these relationships that are toxic for them, they got to ask themselves, like, do I want to continue this relationship? Is this in my alignment? If I'm trying to become the best versions of who I am, because right now it fucking sucks,
Yeah.
then I got to choose me. I can't choose the relationship. I got to choose me. And it's a tough stance to take. But if you take that stance and stand in your power, that's where magic happens. That's where the relationships could potentially be revisited and flourish. Or you get rid of these relationships that are not serving you, and you meet new people who are more in your alignment.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
who circulate the energies that you want to circulate. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough when you're breaking up, and I'm going to call it like a breakup, when you're breaking up with like one of your parents.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always noticed, like, well, you could break up with your parents because that generational pattern is just not working.
Mm-hmm.
But love them from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because maybe they don't want to break that generational pattern, but you do,
Yeah.
right? And they probably don't even recognize it as the parent.
Right.
So for me, I would believe that, you know what, it's okay to break up with your brother and sister, love them from a distance. Like you always say, the Heisman, right?
I love you.
Love you, but from over there.
Yeah. So, I mean, the other possibility of standing in your power and putting a halt or a stop on these relationships, in doing that and standing in your power and taking a stance for your mission statement and for your North Star, sometimes making that powerful stance and that person who the relationship that you have is being stopped, can serve as a wake-up call for that person. It's like, oh wow,
yeah,
why is my best friend no longer talking to me? Maybe that's a cause for introspection, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What am I doing that's causing my friend to be like, no, bro, I don't want to fucking hang out with you anymore?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So maybe that puts them on a trajectory of, hey, I need to take a look at how I'm showing up to these relationships.
Hopefully it makes them become more self-aware. Right.
Hopefully it does.
Yeah.
Hopefully it does.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as we talked about, what are the negative consequences of the fallouts of breaking these generational patterns? Like, yeah, there's fallout. There's fallout in anything decision that you make, but those are only the consequences that we're putting our focus on. But if you put your focus on the other possibilities, like, oh, I actually might become happy, or hey, you know what, my friend actually started recognize what I was doing and started going down their own personal development journey.
Yeah. And that's what would cause people to come back together and
come back together.
Yeah.
Or
rebuild their relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. To your point, I work on myself. I come back to relationship and it's 10 times better than it was before. Right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you can, if all these scenarios are all fucking stories. Right. So if we're going to tell ourselves a story about the fallouts, the consequences, the results of breaking generational patterns, then tell ourselves a story that's going to serve us. Oh, if I break this generational pattern, my family is going to be so much better. Our relationships are going to be that much richer, that much more intimate, that much more vulnerable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it happened for you. I mean, you still had a relationship with your grandfather and your father.
Absolutely. 110%.
Yeah.
Even when I was leading from fear, when I, because there was definitely some people who were just like, that guy, fuck that guy. I don't ever work with that guy again. You know what I mean? Like
And that wasn't gossip, right? That was just facts.
it was both. It was gossip and facts, because it didn't know, nobody approached me about it. It was more like, well, no, that's not true. Some people approached me about it. And then that was also part of the impetus that caused me to look like, okay,
Look
bro,
at yourself.
yeah, I can't operate like this. And when I made that transition and started integrating these new practices and breaking those generational patterns, the relationships that I had flourished. You know what I mean? Everybody was like,
I can see that.
Now people are like, okay, this mode of operation, this version, this higher version of marketing that I'm witnessing right now, so much better. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
And that was a fallout of breaking generational patterns.
Yeah, and you've probably created better relationships with your coworkers and people that you're working with. 100%. Especially as a creative, as an artist, right? Because with all of this generational patterns, I don't know, just so much people are bringing so much baggage to one big community in a group or a project that you're working on, and no one knows.
Yeah,
no one knows, right? We're not asking, hey, you must have a generational pattern that you need to fix.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, again, like generational patterns is not something I don't want to say diagnose, but it's just like, oh, that's a generational pattern. Like, well, for me in my coaching practice, I don't automatically go, oh, that's a generational pattern. Like there's context. I have to really dig and ask questions to find out what the patterns are that we're trying to uncover, and seeing where that shows up in their life. And then if it warrants, then looking at if that pattern is showing up in the lineage. And then if it's showing up in the lineage, depending on the type of work that we need to do, if it's a quick fix or if there's some inner child healing work or somatic work that we get to do to move through that and help break that generational pattern, it's very contingent on the circumstances and the situation. But the point, again, is really understand, ladies and gentlemen, that there is this thing called generational patterns. And if you recognize them, you can really empower yourself with a choice. You now have a choice. Do I want to continue with this behavior and pass it on to my kids? Or do I want to break this pattern and instill my kids with other practices that are more in their alignment or in my alignment, that is more in rhythm and flow and grace?
I love that, man.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and give a quick summary regarding generational patterns to our listeners.
Right. So yeah, actually read that definition again, and then I'll wrap it up.
Generational patterns are personality traits or patterns that are passed down from parent to child. Sometimes they are positive, but often the negative patterns draw more attention.
Right. Negative patterns draw more attention. So if we're experiencing negative energies, we get to understand and pinpoint what that is. In this, again, the example we'll use is guilt. It's like, okay, I see guilt. So you identified what that pattern is. You look into your ways of being and in your life, where does that guilt show up? Where does that pattern show up? How often does it show up? It's like, okay, there's a pattern there that I'm recognizing. If I recognize there's a pattern there, let me take a look at my lineage. Are there similar patterns there? If there are similar patterns there, it's like, oh, okay, now it's a generational pattern. I get to ask the question, do I want to continue with that generational pattern? Or do I want to make a different choice that is within my alignment as far as my mission statement and North Star? And then you can use the framework in getting over what the situation may be. Again, in my case, getting over the guilt, or finding tools and perspectives to help me navigate through guilt.
Got it. There's one generational pattern, a positive generational pattern I want our listeners to create with us. Like, share, and comment.
Yes. And subscribe.
That's a
generational pattern that I would like to endorse as well.
Definitely. All right, man. What's your quote of the day?
Again, I have no idea who said this, but this person gets credit. I'll credit it as a Southern proverb.
Okay.
From the times when I lived in the South.
Go ahead.
And it goes a little something like this. You keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting.
Damn. That, you know what that is? That's
Insanity.
Insanity. That's a who dang.
That's a who dang right there. You know, that quote is really poignant because, again, if you keep doing what you're doing and you're expecting a different result and decide not to choose not to change that pattern or behavior, usually you're going to get the same results. You're going to just be frustrated, angry, and then that could evolve into something not so good. So
awesome.
understand there's a choice, ladies and gentlemen, and make a choice that is in your alignment with your mission statement and North Star. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next round.